Hello, everybody. My name is Masako Toki, the project manager of the Critical Issues Forum, CIF, at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, California. Thank you very much for your participation in the 2018 Critical Issues Forum Teachers Workshop. I am so excited to work with you for this year's CIF project. Also, for those who are watching the recorded lectures at a later time, thank you for watching the lecture video. First, let me explain how this Zoom works. So we are using Zoom for the online conference tool. For those of you new to Zoom, I hope it was an easy process to get started. As a reminder, you are all muted and your video is disabled upon joining. Please keep your videos off to avoid slow connections. During the question and answer sessions, you can unmute your microphone to ask any questions you might have. But it might be easier to use the chat function to do so. You can send questions using the chat function anytime. So Critical Issues Forum, CIF, is a non-proliferation and disarmament education outreach project for high school students and teachers. Nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is a pressing global challenge that compels young generations to create long-term solutions. This year, we expect to have participating schools from around the United States, Japan, and Russia. We are happy to welcome returning schools as well as new schools. I really appreciate your dedication and interest in important global nuclear issues and your continuous hard work of educating youth about non-proliferation and disarmament. The role of teachers for this project and disarmament and non-proliferation education is extremely important. So I am very happy to work with you, such wonderful teachers. This year's CIF topic is Nuclear Risk Reduction, Crisis Prevention in a Time of International Turbulence. Every year, we select a very timely and interesting topic for the CIF project. As you are aware, the international security environment has deteriorated in recent years, especially the international security environment surrounding nuclear non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control are currently in a very difficult situation. Therefore, it is very important for young generations who are and will be our future leaders to study the issues related to nuclear risk reduction, how to prevent crisis, how to prevent the use of nuclear weapons, and how to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. These are very difficult problems, and usually high school students and other young generations do not think about very much. However, it is very important for young generations to study disarmament and non-proliferation issues. This year, CIF project challenges students to study nuclear risks, identify what kind of risk exists, how to solve the problem. I hope the Critical Issues Forum will contribute to that goal of peace and security of a world free of nuclear weapons by promoting disarmament and non-proliferation education to high school students. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to everyone who is supporting this project. This year's CIF project is supported by the Saga Foundation and Tom and Sarah Pattison Fund. I am also very thankful for my colleagues, CNS experts, who are giving a lecture at the workshop. In addition, we are getting significant technical support from the Middlebury Institute Digital Learning Commons, DLC, in Monterey. Thank you so much for all of your support for this important project. Now, I would like to introduce Ms. Elena Sokova, Deputy Director of the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. She was most recently the Executive Director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation between 2011 and 2015. As many of you know, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, VCDNP, was established on the initiative of the Austrian Foreign Ministry in 2010. She returned to the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey in the new capacity of Deputy Director in July 2015. Elena is a member of the Global Agenda Council on Nuclear Security of the World Economic Forum and chair of a working group on the elimination of civil highly enriched uranium, HEU, established by the Fissile Material Working Group. And I just wanted to tell you that you will learn what HEU in the process of this workshop. She holds a master's degree in international public administration from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey and a law degree from the Moscow State University. She has numerous publications on many prestigious journals and magazines and has presented and taught at various international conferences and workshops. So now, Elena, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Masako. Thank you for the for a very generous introduction, and thank you for your continuing work in championing this very important program for high schools. On behalf of the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, I'm very pleased to welcome all participants to the 2018-2019 Critical Issues Forum. As many of you know, that despite the continuing risks posed by nuclear weapons and continuing calls to introduce nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament education into curriculum of high schools and universities, there are still very few opportunities to do so. And it is really falls on the shoulders of teachers like you and professors to introduce these topics to their students. And we're here at CNS are very grateful to have you as promoters and champions of some of these issues and for working with students on these important topics, and sometimes often at the expense of your personal time. So I just wanted to start with a heartfelt thank you to all of you and to welcome you to this year's program. As Masako mentioned, this year's topic is nuclear risk reduction, crisis prevention in a time of international turbulence. This is a kind of a stark reduction for departure from the last year's program when we discussed the adoption and the prospects of negotiations and the adoption and prospects for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I don't want to say that the risks of nuclear weapons went away or that we had fewer concerns about them while we were discussing last year's topic. But nevertheless, I would say that in the last 2-3 years, we see a very new dynamic in the international relations. And the dynamic that even before this last 2-3 years, some people started labeling as Cold War II. But it's really a matter of the most recent developments that puts the nuclear risk reduction on the forefront of the discussion at international organizations and in the media as a news items. How many of you have been in the US or in Japan or in Russia, have been observing the discussions about a potential nuclear arms exchange between the United States and the DPRK or North Korea, literally about a year ago. Obviously, we have now a little bit of a good news here in terms of the dialogue between the United States and North Korea, but we're still very far from solving the nuclear problems on the Korean Peninsula, and the threat still remains. But what's the most disconcerting, particularly in the last year or so, is the quickly deteriorating relationship between the United States and the Russian Federation. It manifests in many fora, including during the discussions of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, at its review conferences and preparatory committees, at the UN Security Council, and so forth. There are a number of really disconcerting efforts on both sides that give the rise to these worries and tensions. First and foremost, the United States adopted the new nuclear posture review, in which it calls for the use and development of low-yield nuclear weapons, supposedly to make them more usable in the potential conflicts and dissuade other parties. Russia, this spring, during President Putin announced in April during his address of the Union, and revealed a number of new weapons that Russia is pursuing, including nuclear-powered missiles, the one that can avoid any detection and also can fly around the globe continuously because of the nuclear power. These and many types of developments are really taking us back into the wrong direction. It's a regression rather than progress. I would focus on some of the other issues as well in the US-Russian relationship, but two particularly other developments that make me worry about the state of the US-Russian relationship is the continuing brinkmanship between the two countries when it comes to patrolling the borders of each countries, encounters where they're potential close to each other when overflying these borders. There have been over 100 different incidents and accidents over the last couple of years when the two countries came too close, be it strategic aircrafts or nuclear submarines, even though nothing happened, but it's still these types of incidents do not bode well in a time of heightened relationship. We have to look back at the history of the nuclear age when way too many close calls happened. And a number of them were really literally because of the mistake of misreading of the radars or other incoming information. But when we have a heightened level of alert and we have these encounters multiplied by a possible malfunction and calculation, this makes really uncomfortable both the politicians and citizens around the world. Another development that gives me a real concern is the announcement made by the Trump administration, or Trump himself actually, to withdraw from the intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This is a treaty that has been that was put in place more than 20 years ago, still during the period of the Cold War, and eliminated the whole class of nuclear weapons and their stationing in Europe. The nuclear weapons with a range between 500 and 5,000 kilometers. This achievement led to the elimination, as I mentioned, the whole class of nuclear weapons, and kept the balance in Europe for many years. The United States accused Russia of violating this treaty with the testing of a new missile. Russia, on the Russian Federation, accused the United States of violating the same treaty due to the use of missile interceptors in Europe that could also be used as a regular delivery systems for nuclear weapons. But long story short, instead of figuring out how to move past these differences and maybe reconciling technical issues, the proposed withdrawal by the United States from this treaty is certainly undermining the existing arms control agreements and regime between the United States and the Russian Federation. The Trump administration has also announced that, Trump announced during his presidential campaign he doesn't like the New START treaty, the treaty that addresses strategic nuclear weapons between the two countries. And there are now concerns that this very important instrument of maintaining the strategic stability and balance between the two countries could also be undermined, and the US may withdraw it. So there are a lot of concerns between these two countries and the entire arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament community. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not the only issue, and not only the US-Russian relationship that gives us very serious concerns and makes us focus on some of the risk reductions. I already mentioned the DPRK and its nuclear program. I would add the continuing arms race in Asia, particularly between India and Pakistan. There are also discussions about the continuing buildup of nuclear armaments by China. I would add the instability in the Middle East to the list of these concerns, including potential unraveling of the nuclear deal with Iran. As some of you who follow the news, Trump also withdrew from the negotiated in 2015 six-party, 6 countries plus Iran agreement that limited nuclear program in Iran. The US withdrew unilaterally. Other countries, other P5 and European countries remain committed to the deal. But it remains to be seen whether the deal can survive, particularly if the US imposes some secondary sanctions on countries that continue to work with Iran. If the deal unravels, what will be the next steps in the Middle East, and whether we can face a chain of proliferation events in the Middle East as well. We continue to be very concerned about the potential of terrorism, particularly terrorism, nuclear terrorism, with the use of nuclear weapons or ability to construct crude nuclear weapons from nuclear materials. Terrorism that could involve sabotage or attacks on nuclear facilities or involving radiological materials. At the same time, in the age of cyber threats and cyber activities, in the age of digital technologies, we should also be very concerned about potential by terrorists without laying their hands on the actual nuclear weapons or materials, to inflict damage or to force countries to make them believe that their exchange is happening, or some other misinformation that is fed to the systems of control and command of nuclear weapons. So this is another real threat that continues to be hovering over the security of and safety of the world. Another area of potential challenge that adds to nuclear risk is the development of other new technologies that, on one hand, they're quite beneficial in many areas of the life of human beings and humankind. Yet, some of these technologies, when they applied to military purposes, could not only become threatening weapons themselves, but could also really shift the balance in the nuclear and relationship and strategic stability within the countries. I would just mention a few of them. Both the United States and the Russian Federation, as well as some other countries, China, are now working on new types of conventional weapons that could really upset the strategic stability and balance, including hypersonic weapons, gliding weapons, the use of various autonomous systems in weaponry, artificial intelligence, as well as the introduction of weapons that are dual capable. For example, many cruise missiles developed both by the United States and the Russian Federation could carry both conventional weapons, but could also carry nuclear weapons. When a country sees a cruise missile approaching it, it would have no indication and knowledge whether it's carrying conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead. Many experts in this regard say that this really upsets the balance and potentially could lead to a conflict due to misreading or not knowing actually what kind of weapons is approaching. The other part that I wanted to note is, I already mentioned the withdrawal of the Trump administration, or a threat of withdrawal from the INF treaty, the unilateral US withdrawal from the nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA agreement, joint plan of action for Iran. But it is overall the undermining of the treaty's international obligations that really gives a high concern to many non-proliferation and security experts overall. And we see one after another attempts to either to ignore international norms or to sideline or even undermine some of these norms. There are many issues that haven't been resolved yet, including, for example, we still do not have an enforce a treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons testing. Yet at the same time, there are discussions within the current US administration about possibility even withdrawing from that, if the reason is provided that the US needs to resume nuclear testing. While the Russian Federation has signed this treaty and ratified it, but if the US decides to withdraw, there is nothing that would prevent Russia to do the same. I'm sure other countries will follow it well. And China, by the way, hasn't signed it at all. So this heightened risk, brinkmanship that sometimes is not only in the behavior of the flights and ships and military of the both countries, but also comes from the announcements and statements by the leaders of the two countries really having an effect that gives concern to many well-known politicians and regular citizens. For example, I want to quote William Perry, who was the 19th US Secretary of Defense. He said that in January 2018, almost a year ago, but it's still very valid in my view. And he says that when I was Secretary of Defense for the United States, I worked very closely with my counterparts in Russia to reduce the nuclear dangers to both of our countries. Much has changed since then. Today, the danger of some sort of a nuclear catastrophe is greater than it was during the Cold War, and most people are blissfully unaware of this danger. This heightened risk reinforces the importance of the US and Russia working together to reduce the threat. Only through cooperation can we make both of our countries safer. So what I would want to add to that even though this statement concerns the two countries, the United States and the Russian Federation, I would say that this responsibility to cooperate and work to reduce this danger, to avoid the nuclear catastrophe, is really a responsibility of the entire international community. And the countries that are participating in the Critical Issues Forum, first of all, represent the United States and the Russian Federation, but the Japanese participants are coming from the country who is, and thank God, continues to be the only country that ever suffered from nuclear weapons. I think that makes even more relevant for these two countries for these three countries and students and teachers from them to work in this area. One more item before I move to the conclusion of my remarks. What I listed as the various risks that we're observing in the last couple of years. One that I wanted to make a few notes is many of you who are continuing in our program, you've spent last year in discussions about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it is an outstanding achievement in itself. But what we can see nowadays is, first of all, the refusal of the nuclear weapon states to even recognize this treaty as valid. They say they would never sign it. And there is a whole group of other states that are covered by various nuclear security arrangements, be those NATO states or some other so-called nuclear umbrella states. They continue also to have quite a sometimes not as strong as nuclear weapon states, but also very serious opposition to the treaty. At the same time, the divide between the nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states continues to grow. And coupled with the deteriorating relationship between the major nuclear powers and other risks existing, I don't think we have a very good combination in our hands. I don't want to sound alarmist, but I think this is something that we really need to increase our work both as with a broader set of actors and civil society. I think there is still too much complacency in the world about the dangers of nuclear weapons. And it is a very great responsibility for those who work in education and training to make sure that the next generation is familiar with these risks and that next generation is engaged in working towards the reduction of these risks and hopefully towards eliminating nuclear weapons at some point. I want to conclude with the message that is part of the Agenda for Disarmament, Securing Our Common Future report by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. For some of you, actually, it would be a very good resource to look at various non-proliferation disarmament issues and put them in a larger context of overall disarmament agenda. He actually places a very big emphasis on the role of young people. That's what he says. Young people have tremendous force to bring about change in the world. Young people today are more cosmopolitan, more internationalist, and more open. They are more likely to reject the xenophobia, intolerance, and racism that are reappearing in many of our societies, and giving popular support to fear-based military and security policies. He continues, most importantly, we look to young people to be the ultimate force for change at the local, national, and international levels, to make the world safer and more secure for all. More education and training opportunities should be established in order to create a platform for the sustainable entry of young people from all parts of the world into the field of disarmament. This would aim to impart knowledge and skills to young people, to empower them to make their contribution as national and world citizens. So you are enablers. You are those who enable this young generation to make this contribution. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly for your continuing contribution to this field and your commitment to the Critical Issues Forum. Thank you for exposing the next generation to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament issues and other critical issues of our time. And I wish all of you and us a very successful and a very interesting and important year in the Critical Issues Forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elena. You laid out an excellent summary of many various nuclear risks and threats. And there are so many things we have to study and we have to tackle. And thank you so much. It was really encouraging and inspiring. We have so many tasks ahead of us. But as you quoted from the Antonio Guterres' message, young people have a very important mission to work for nuclear disarmament for the safer world. So we are going to study very hard. So thank you so much. And I would like to stop recording now and before we move to the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Masaka, and thank you, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.